The year was 2847, and the diplomatic vessel Endurance moved slowly through the darkness of space toward the largest structure any human had ever seen. The Galactic Council Station was a massive ring of metal and light that orbited a pale blue world called Desser Prime. Inside the ship, Ambassador Daniel Cross stood at the viewing window and watched as smaller vessels from dozens of different species came and went from the station like insects around a hive. Standing beside him was his aide, a young woman named Katie Moore. She had dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had been chosen for this mission because she stayed calm when others panicked, and Daniel knew that calmness would be tested soon enough. "How many species are part of the council?" Katie asked quietly. 347 at last count, Daniel replied. "Some have been members for over 100,000 years. Others joined just a few centuries ago. We are the newest and the youngest, by a considerable margin." The Endurance docked with the station without incident. Daniel adjusted his formal uniform one last time and walked down the boarding ramp with Katie 2 steps behind him. They were greeted by a creature that looked like a praying mantis made of silver metal. Its name was Coordinator Vesh, and it served as the welcome officer for new species. "Ambassador Kruss," Vesh said through a translation device hanging around its neck. "The council has been expecting you. Please follow me." They walked through corridors filled with beings that defied description. Some floated through the air like living clouds. Others walked on dozens of legs or no legs at all. A few were so strange that Daniel could not tell where they began or ended. Every single one of them stopped to stare at the humans as they passed. "They are curious about you," Vesh explained. "Your species is quite unusual." "In what way?" Katie asked. Vesh made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "In every way. But you will learn more about that soon." The council chamber was enormous. It was shaped like a bowl, with rows of seats rising up on all sides, and a central platform where speakers could address the assembly. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats, creating a sea of colors and shapes and sounds that nearly overwhelmed Daniel's senses. At the highest point of the chamber sat the Valari, the species that had founded the council nearly 200,000 years ago. They were tall beings made of living crystal, and they communicated through musical tones that created complex harmonies. Their leader, a being called Tesseract, rose as the humans entered. "Ambassador Daniel Cross of Earth," Tesseract announced. Its voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "You stand before the Galactic Council as representative of your species. We have observed humanity for 3 of your centuries, watching as you developed the technology to travel between stars. This achievement grants you the right to request membership in our assembly." Daniel walked to the central platform and bowed respectfully. "On behalf of all humanity, I thank the council for this opportunity. We come seeking knowledge, friendship, and peaceful cooperation with all species." A murmur passed through the chamber. Daniel could not tell if it was approval or skepticism. Another voice spoke up before Tesseract could respond. It came from a creature that resembled an armored beetle standing on 2 legs. Its shell was dark red, and its eyes glowed with a fierce yellow light. This was Gorth, representative of the Corvon hegemony. And even Daniel could sense that he was looking for trouble. "Before we accept these creatures into our community," Gorth said, "I demand to know more about their history. Specifically, I want to know about their conflicts. Every species has a past, and we should understand theirs before granting them any status." Tesseract's crystal body flickered with what might have been irritation. The Corvins were hardly peaceful when they joined the council. "Representative Gorth, just precisely why I know the importance of understanding a species' capacity for violence," Gorth replied smoothly. "The humans have been observed for centuries, yes, but always from a distance. Now they are here among us. We deserve to know what they are capable of." Katie leaned close to Daniel. "We were warned this might happen. The Corvins have been trying to expand their influence in the council for decades. They see us as a potential rival." Daniel nodded slightly and addressed the chamber. "We have nothing to hide. Humanity's history is complex and often troubled, but we are not ashamed of who we are or what we have overcome. We are prepared to share our historical records with the Council." Tesseract's harmonics softened with approval. A generous offer. The Council accepts. "I want full access," Gorth insisted. "Military records, weapons development, strategic doctrines, everything." Daniel hesitated. He knew what those records contained. He knew what the Council would see when they reviewed humanity's long and bloody history of warfare. But refusing would only make things worse. It would suggest that humanity had something terrible to hide. "Full access," Daniel agreed. "All of our historical archives will be made available to the Council's research division." He authorized the transfer with a gesture on his personal device. Thousands of years of human history, including every war ever fought, every weapon ever created, and every atrocity ever committed, began flowing into the Council's database. Gorth's eyes glowed brighter with satisfaction. He thought he was exposing a potential enemy. He thought he was protecting the Council from a dangerous new species. He had no idea what he had just asked to see. As Daniel and Katie were escorted to their quarters on the station, Katie spoke quietly. "Do you think they will understand?" "Understand what?" "Why we are the way we are. Why we fight the way we fight." Daniel was silent for a long moment. He thought about the trenches of the First World War, where men had lived in mud and died by the millions. He thought about the atomic bombs that had ended the Second World War and begun the nuclear age. He thought about every conflict that had followed, each one more terrible and more sophisticated than the last. "No," he finally said, "I do not think they will understand. But perhaps that is not the point." "Then what is?" Daniel looked out a window at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were living their lives, unaware that their entire history was being reviewed by beings who had never known true war. Beings who had never faced extinction and refused to accept it. Beings who had never loved or hated with the terrible intensity that defined humanity. "The point is that they will see who we really are," Daniel said, "and then we will see how they respond. That will tell us everything we need to know about whether we truly belong here." Katie nodded and said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. The records had been sent. The judgment would come soon enough. Neither of them slept well that night. 3 weeks passed on the Galactic Council station. Daniel Cross began to notice changes in the way other species treated him. At first, the aliens had been curious about the new arrivals. They would approach him in corridors, ask questions through their translators, and study him with the interest of scientists examining a new specimen. But as the days went on, the curiosity turned to something else. Something that looked very much like fear. Delegations from several species withdrew from the station entirely. Others moved to different sections to avoid crossing paths with the humans. Even Coordinator Vesh, who had been so welcoming on the first day, now kept conversations short and avoided making eye contact. Katie noticed it too. "Something has changed," she said one morning as they walked to the dining hall. "They are not just curious anymore. They are afraid of us." "The Council must be reviewing our records," Daniel replied. "They are learning about our history. But we knew they would find difficult things. All species have wars in their past, not like ours." They reached the dining hall to find it nearly empty. The few aliens present quickly gathered their food and left when the humans entered. Daniel and Katie ate alone, surrounded by hundreds of empty seats designed for beings of every shape and size. The summons came that afternoon. Daniel was required to appear before the full council immediately. He dressed in his formal uniform and walked to the chamber with Katie beside him. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his face calm. Whatever was coming, he would face it with dignity. The chamber was fuller than it had been during his first visit. Every seat was occupied, and additional observers lined the walls. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with emotions that Daniel could feel even without understanding the body language of 300. Different species. Tesseract stood at the center of the highest platform. Its crystal body flickering with complex colors that Daniel had learned indicated distress. When it spoke, its harmonics were sharp and discordant. Ambassador Cross, the Council has completed its initial review of your species' historical records. We have much to discuss. I am prepared to answer any questions, Daniel said. Questions. The word came out harsh through the translator. We have many questions. But first, we wish to share what we have learned. A holographic display activated above the central platform. Images began to appear. Daniel forced himself to watch without flinching. The trenches of the First World War appeared first. Miles of muddy ditches filled with soldiers who lived like rats and died like insects. The translator provided narration from the Council's research. H-Team, describing the numbers in a flat, emotionless voice. 20 million dead. Entire generations of young men destroyed. Chemical weapons that melted lungs and burned skin. And the war had lasted only 4 years. The display shifted to the Second World War. The bombing of cities. The camps where millions were systematically murdered. The final, terrible flash of atomic fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The numbers grew larger. 70 million dead. 6% of the world's entire population. And the wars kept coming. Korea, Vietnam, the conflicts in the Middle East that lasted for decades. The border wars and civil wars and proxy wars that never seemed to end. The weapons grew more powerful. The methods grew more sophisticated. The death tolls continued to climb. Finally, the display showed humanity's current military capabilities. Ships that could crack planets. Weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. Soldiers enhanced with technology that made them faster, stronger, and more deadly than any natural creature. Strategic doctrines designed for conflicts on a scale that most council species could not even imagine. The display faded, and silence filled the chamber. Tesseract spoke again, its voice barely above a whisper. In the last 6,000 years of your recorded history, your species has engaged in over 15,000 armed conflicts. You have killed over 1 billion of your own kind through organized violence. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your entire planet multiple times over, and you came terrifyingly close to using them on more than one occasion. Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. A floating cloud of sentient gas called Ambassador Naris drifted forward. We have observed many species join this council. Some were peaceful. Others were aggressive. The Corvants, for example, fought 17 wars during their first millennium of recorded history. This was considered exceptionally violent. The cloud pulsed with agitation. Your species fought more wars than that in a single century. You have never stopped fighting. Not once. Not ever. Gorth, the Corvan representative who had demanded the records, rose slowly from his seat. His armored shell seemed duller than before, and his glowing eyes had lost some of their fierce intensity. I watched your footage of the Battle of Stalingrad, Gorth said. His voice was different now, lacking the aggressive edge it had carried during the first meeting. I saw your soldiers fighting in temperatures that would kill most species within hours. I saw them starving, freezing, dying by the thousands every day. And I saw them refuse to surrender. Even when the battle was clearly lost, they kept fighting. They fought until there was nothing left. He paused, and Daniel realized with shock that the Corvan was trembling. I have led armies into battle, Gorth continued. I have killed enemies with my own claws. I thought I understood war. But I did not understand what your species means by that word. You do not fight to win. You fight to destroy completely, utterly. You would rather die than surrender. You would rather see everything burn than accept defeat. Daniel finally found his voice. We have also known peace. We have created art, music, science, and philosophy. We have shown great kindness and compassion. Yes, Gorth agreed. We saw that too, and that makes it worse. You are not mindless beasts driven by instinct. You are intelligent, creative, capable of great love and beauty, and yet you choose to wage war with a ferocity that defies all reason. That is what frightens us, Ambassador. Not your weapons, not your numbers. Your willingness to use them without limit. Tesseract's crystal form pulsed with dark colors. We must ask you directly, Ambassador Cross. How has your species survived? How are you still here after all this violence? Daniel thought carefully before answering. We survived because we refused to give up. Every war ended eventually, Every conflict reached a conclusion, and after each one, we rebuilt. We healed. We moved forward. But you never learned, Nerys observed. You never stopped, Daniel admitted. We never learned to stop fighting entirely, but we learned to fight for things that mattered. Freedom, justice, the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Our wars have been terrible, but they have also been purposeful. The chamber erupted in noise as dozens of species began speaking at once. Some demanded that humanity be expelled immediately. Others argued that such a powerful species should be kept close, where it could be watched. A few suggested more extreme measures that the translator rendered in cold, clinical terms. Daniel stood in the center of the chaos, Katie silent beside him, and waited for the storm to pass. He had known this moment would come. He had known that humanity's history would shock and horrify beings who had never experienced true war. What he did not know was what would come next, the council declared. A period of deliberation that would last 6 standard months. During this time, humans were confined to a small section of the station and forbidden from interacting with most other species. Guards were posted at every entrance to their quarters, though whether they were there to keep the humans in or to keep others out was never made clear. Daniel and Katie settled into a routine of waiting. They exercised in the small gymnasium provided for them. They reviewed reports from Earth. They talked about everything except the judgment that hung over them like a blade. Neither wanted to speak about what might happen if the Council decided humanity was too dangerous to join the galactic community. 3 weeks into the deliberation, they received their first visitor. His name was Dr. Seville, and he belonged to a species called the Vantheri. He was small, barely reaching Daniel's chest, with gray skin and eyes so large they seemed to take up half his face. His translator identified him as a historian and researcher specializing in the study of warfare. I have been given special permission to speak with you, Dr. Seville explained as he settled into a chair that was far too large for his body. The Council believes that understanding your species may be more valuable than simply fearing it. And what have you learned so far? Katie asked. Dr. Seville blinked his enormous eyes several times, a gesture that his translator identified as indicating deep thought. I have been studying your Second World War in particular, the conflict you call the Eastern Front. Daniel nodded slowly. That was one of the most brutal campaigns in our history. It's brutal. Dr. Seville tested the word as if trying to understand its full meaning. Your records indicate that over 26 million of your people died on one side alone. The material destruction was beyond calculation. Cities were leveled. Entire regions were depopulated. And yet the survivors continued fighting until one side achieved total victory. The alternative was unacceptable, Daniel said simply. Surrender would have meant the destruction of everything we held dear. This is what confuses me. Dr. Seville leaned forward, his eyes somehow growing even larger. My species, the Vantheri, fought exactly one major war in our entire history. It was against the Corvin hegemony who attempted to conquer our home world approximately 40,000 years ago. We lost 200,000 soldiers before our government surrendered. You surrendered? Katie asked. Of course. The battle was clearly lost. Continuing to fight would only have increased our casualties without changing the outcome. It was the logical choice. Daniel and Katie exchanged glances. Neither spoke. Dr. Seville noticed their reaction. You find this strange. You find it difficult to understand, Daniel admitted. In our history, surrender has almost always been seen as the worst possible option. Worse than death in many cases. But why? If the war cannot be won, what purpose does continued fighting serve? Daniel thought about this for a long moment. He thought about his grandfather, who had served in one of Earth's many wars and had told stories about men who fought to the last breath rather than accept capture. He thought about the ancient warriors of humanity's past, who had chosen death over dishonor countless times. I suppose it comes down to what we are willing to accept, Daniel finally said. Your species looked at the situation, calculated the odds, and made a logical decision. My species does not work that way. We are not always logical. We are driven by emotion, by pride, by a deep need to never give up no matter how hopeless things seem. This is what the Council fears, Dr. Savell said quietly. Not your weapons or your technology. Those things can be matched or countered. What cannot be countered is your psychology. Your absolute refusal to stop fighting even when all hope is lost. Is that not a strength? Katie asked. It can be, but it is also terrifying to those who must face you. The Corvins are considered the most aggressive species in the galaxy. They have conquered dozens of worlds and fought wars against half the Council at various points in history. But even they have limits. Biological imperatives that prevent them from fighting past a certain point. Self-preservation instincts that override their aggression when defeat becomes certain. Dr. Seville paused, his large eyes fixed on Daniel with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Your species has no such limits. You have proven this again and again throughout your history. You will fight until you win, or until there is nothing left to fight with. And sometimes, even then, you keep fighting. This is not normal. This is not healthy. And this is why the Council is afraid. The days continued to pass. Dr. Savell visited several more times, always asking questions about human conflicts, human psychology, human nature. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than judging, which made the conversations easier to bear, but other visitors were less friendly. One evening, a delegation of Corvins demanded access to the human quarters. The guards refused at first, but the Corvins outranked them. And eventually Daniel and Katie found themselves facing 6 armored beetles in their small living space. The leader was not Gorth, but a younger Corvin whose shell was bright red and whose eyes burned with undisguised hostility. His name was Commander Thresh, and he had come to deliver a warning. I have reviewed your military capabilities, Thresh said without preamble. You are dangerous. More dangerous than most Council species realize. Your ships are faster than ours. Your weapons are more powerful. Your soldiers are trained to a level that our best warriors cannot match. We have not come here seeking conflict, Daniel replied calmly. That does not matter. Conflict will find you eventually. It always does. Thresh stepped closer, his armored face inches from Daniel's. I want you to know that the Corvin hegemony is watching. If your species ever threatens the peace of this Council, we will respond. And we will not show the restraint that you have seen from others. Daniel did not flinch. He met the Corvin's glowing eyes without fear. Commander Thresh, I appreciate your concern. But I should warn you about something. You have reviewed our military capabilities. You have studied our history. But you have only seen the public records. You have only seen what we chose to show the galaxy. He paused, letting the words sink in. There are weapons we have never used. Strategies we have never deployed. Capabilities that we hope will never be necessary. The Council has seen our past. They have not seen our potential. I suggest you think very carefully before making threats. Corvins left without another word. Katie stared at Daniel with wide eyes. Was that wise? Probably not. But I am tired of being afraid. If the Council decides to reject us, so be it. But I will not let anyone believe that humanity can be intimidated. Katie smiled despite her worry. My grandmother used to say something about that. She said that humans might not be the strongest or the smartest, but we are the most stubborn creatures in the universe. Daniel laughed softly. She was right. And maybe that is exactly what the galaxy needs. The 6 months of deliberation finally ended, and Daniel Cross was summoned to the Council chamber for the final judgment. He walked through the corridors of the station with Katie beside him, both of them wearing their formal uniforms and their best attempts at calm expressions. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine the future of humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. Species that had never attended Council sessions before had sent representatives to witness this historic moment. The viewing galleries were full, and holographic projectors carried the proceedings to every corner of the station and beyond. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds were watching. Tesseract stood at the center of the highest platform, its crystal body shimmering with colors that Daniel had learned to associate with serious deliberation. The great being waited until perfect silence filled the chamber before speaking. Ambassador Daniel Cross of Earth. You stand before this council to hear our judgment regarding humanity's application for membership. The decision we announced today was not reached easily. It required more debate, more analysis, and more consideration than any decision in the last 50,000 years. Daniel felt his heart pounding but kept his face neutral. He would show no fear. Whatever the verdict, he would accept it with dignity. After reviewing your species' complete historical records, consulting with experts from over 200 member worlds, and conducting extensive analysis of your military capabilities, the Council has reached a conclusion. The pause that followed seemed to last forever. Humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Council. A wave of noise swept through the chamber. Some voices expressed relief. Others shouted in protest. Daniel saw Gorth rise from his seat, his armored shell darker than ever with what might have been anger or disbelief. Tesseract's harmonics sharpened, cutting through the chaos and demanding silence. However, this membership comes with conditions. Conditions that have never before been imposed on any species in the history of our assembly. Daniel stepped forward. What conditions? Humanity's wars are hereby banned from all galactic territory. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Daniel heard Katie's sharp intake of breath beside him. I do not understand, Daniel said carefully. How can wars be banned? Tesseract's crystal form pulsed with complex colors as it explained. You may not engage in armed conflict with any council member species under any circumstances. You may not fight among yourselves within galactic territory. Any human vessel carrying weapons of war must remain within your home system and your established colonies. Your soldiers may not be deployed beyond your own borders, and no human military technology may be shared, sold, demonstrated, or transferred to any other species. Gorth stepped forward, his voice harsh with barely contained rage. This is unacceptable. You are granting membership to the most dangerous species we have ever encountered while simultaneously admitting that they must be contained. How does this make sense? It makes perfect sense, Tesseract replied calmly. We have studied humanity extensively over the past 6 months. We have analyzed their psychology, their history, and their potential. And we have reached several conclusions, a crystalline being paused, letting its words carry to every corner of the chamber. First, humanity is indeed the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Their capacity for violence exceeds that of any other known intelligent life form. Their weapons are devastating. Their tactics are ruthless. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves in pursuit of victory is unlike anything we have documented in 200,000 years of galactic history. Daniel felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. Every being in the chamber was staring at him, at Katie, at the 2 representatives of a species that had just been declared the most dangerous in the galaxy. Second, Tesseract continued. Humanity has shown remarkable restraint since achieving faster-than-light travel. They could have used their military capabilities to conquer neighboring systems. They chose not to. They could have arrived at this station with warships instead of a diplomatic vessel. They chose not to. They have come seeking peace and cooperation, despite possessing the power to take whatever they wanted by force. Gorth made a sound of disgust. For now, but what happens when they decide that peace is no longer in their interest? That brings us to our third conclusion. Tesseract's form flickered with colors that suggested grim determination. Making enemies of humanity would be catastrophic. We have calculated the probable outcomes of a conflict between the Galactic Council and Earth, even with our combined resources. Even with every member species contributing to the war effort, victory is not certain. And even if we won, the cost would be beyond calculation. The chamber fell silent. No one had expected to hear those words. The humans have a concept called mutually assured destruction. It refers to a state where both sides of a conflict possess enough power to destroy each other completely, making war unwinnable for anyone. We find ourselves in such a state now. Humanity has the capability to cause damage that would take millions of years to repair, even if it meant their own destruction. This is not a threat we can ignore or eliminate. Ambassador Nares, the cloud of sentient gas, floated forward. Then why accept them at all? Why not simply leave them isolated in their corner of the galaxy? Because isolation would not last, Tesseract replied. Humanity is curious. They explore. They expand. They reach out to the unknown with a drive that cannot be contained. Eventually, they would encounter other species regardless of our wishes. And such encounters, without the framework of council membership, would likely lead to exactly the kind of conflict we fear. The crystalline being turned to address Daniel directly. Ambassador Cross, we are offering you a choice. Join the council under these restrictions, and your species will have access to the knowledge, resources, and friendship of 300 worlds. Refuse, and you will be on your own, surrounded by species that fear you, with no framework for peaceful interaction. Daniel thought about the restrictions being proposed. No wars in galactic territory. No deploying soldiers beyond human borders. No sharing military technology. It was a cage of sorts, a set of chains designed to contain humanity's most destructive tendencies. But it was also an opportunity. A chance to prove that humanity could be more than its history suggested. A chance to show the galaxy that the species which had invented total war could also choose peace. He looked at Katie, who gave him a small nod. On behalf of humanity, Daniel said clearly, I accept these terms. We came here seeking friendship, not conflict. If these restrictions are what it takes to earn the Council's trust, then we will abide by them willingly. Tesseract's harmonics softened with what might have been relief. Then it is done. Humanity is now a full member of the Galactic Council, subject to the conditions outlined. May this be the beginning of a new era of peace and cooperation. As Daniel walked out of the chamber, he passed by Gorth, who had remained silent since Tesseract's explanation of the military calculations. The Corvin's glowing eyes tracked him with an expression that Daniel could not quite read. You have been given a gift, Gorth said quietly. A chance to prove that you are more than destroyers. I hope for all our sakes that you do not waste it. Daniel paused and met the Corvin's eyes. We will not waste it. Humanity has spent thousands of years learning how to fight. Perhaps it is time we learned how to do something else. He walked on, leaving Gorth standing alone, thinking about a species that had been judged too dangerous to fight and too powerful to ignore. 50 years passed since the judgment that had banned humanity's wars from galactic space. In that time, the universe had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human scientists worked alongside researchers from dozens of species, making discoveries that advanced medical technology by centuries. Human artists created works that moved beings across hundreds of worlds to tears, to joy, to emotions that had no names in their languages. Human diplomats helped to negotiate peace treaties between species that had been enemies for thousands of years, bringing their unique understanding of conflict to help others avoid it. The ban remained in place, but it had become less of a restriction and more of a symbol. A reminder of what humanity had been and what it had chosen to become. On the anniversary of the original judgment, a young diplomat named Grace Sullivan stood in the same council chamber where her grandmother Katie had stood half a century earlier. Grace had inherited her grandmother's dark hair and sharp eyes, as well as her ability to remain calm under pressure. She had been chosen to deliver a speech marking this historic occasion. The chamber was full, just as it had been 50 years ago. Tesseract was still there, the ancient crystal being having aged only slightly in the intervening decades. Gorth was gone, having passed away 30 years earlier. But his son, Gorth the Younger, sat in the Corvin delegation's seat. His shell was the same dark red as his father's. His eyes carried the same fierce glow. Grace walked to the central platform and looked up at the assembled representatives of 300 species. She had rehearsed this speech 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself setting aside her prepared words. 50 years ago, my grandmother stood in this chamber and heard the council's judgment. Humanity would be accepted as members, but our wars would be banned. At the time, this seemed like a punishment, a recognition that we were too dangerous, too violent, too broken to be trusted with the same freedoms as other species. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the chamber. In some ways, the council was right. We were dangerous. We had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destruction. We had built weapons that could end worlds and developed strategies that could crush entire civilizations. We had proven, again and again, that we would fight until nothing remained rather than accept defeat. The chamber was absolutely silent. Every being present was listening with complete attention. But the council also saw something else in us. Something that gave them hope despite their fear. They saw that we had chosen to come here peacefully. They saw that we had the power to take what we wanted by force and had instead asked to be accepted as equals. They saw that the same species which had invented total war had also invented something called hope. Grace smiled softly. Thinking of her grandmother, who had passed away 10 years earlier after a long and remarkable life, hope is a strange thing. It is the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, no matter how dark things seem. It is the refusal to accept that the worst of what we are is all that we can be. It is the stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence that we can change, that we can grow, that we can become more than our history would suggest. She turned to face Tesseract directly. 50 years ago, you took a risk on humanity. You accepted us despite your fears. You gave us a chance to prove that we could be something other than destroyers. And I stand here today to tell you that we have tried our best to honor that trust. The holographic display activated, showing images from the past 5 decades. Human doctors treating patients on distant worlds. Human engineers building structures that defied imagination. Human teachers sharing knowledge with students of 100 different species. Human artists creating beauty that transcended language and culture. We have not been perfect, Grace continued. There have been incidents. Moments when our old nature surfaced and caused problems. But we have learned from each one. We have grown. We have changed. Not because we were forced to, but because we chose to. She paused, gathering herself for the most important part of her speech. I want to address something that has gone unspoken for 50 years. The council banned our wars because you were afraid of what we could do. This was reasonable. We are afraid of it too. Every human who knows our history understands the terrible potential that lives within us. The capacity for violence that runs through our blood like fire. Gorth the Younger leaned forward, his glowing eyes fixed on Grace with intense interest. But I want you to understand something that you may have missed. That same fire, that same terrible intensity, is what drives everything we do. When we love with the same passion that once drove us to war. When we create with the same determination that once built empires of destruction. When we help others, we do so with the same refusal to give up that once made us fight to the last breath. Grace spread her hands, encompassing the entire chamber in her gesture. You banned our wars and we accepted that ban willingly. But you cannot ban what we are. You cannot separate the violence from the creativity, the destruction from the building, the hate from the love. They are all part of the same fire that burns within every human heart. She walked forward, stepping down from the platform to stand on the floor of the chamber, closer to the assembled delegates. So instead of trying to contain us, instead of trying to limit us, perhaps it is time to truly understand us. The same species that invented the atomic bomb also invented penicillin. The same people who built death camps also built hospitals. The same hearts that are capable of hatred beyond measure are also capable of love beyond words. Grace looked up at Tesseract, meeting the crystal being's ancient gaze without fear. 50 years ago, you judged us by our worst moments. You saw our wars, our atrocities, our endless capacity for destruction, and you were right to be concerned. But perhaps after 50 years, you can also judge us by our best moments, by the peace we have helped create, by the lives we have helped save, by the beauty we have helped bring into this universe. Tesseract's harmonics were soft and thoughtful. What are you asking for, Ambassador Sullivan? I am not asking for anything to change. The ban can remain in place. We have learned to live with it, and perhaps it has been good for us. What I am asking for is understanding, recognition that humanity is more than its history of violence, an acknowledgement that we have earned a place in this community, not despite our nature, but because of it. She turned to face Gorth the Younger. Your father once told my grandmother that we had been given a gift, A chance to prove that we were more than destroyers. I believe we have proven that. Not by becoming something different, but by choosing to use what we are for something better. Gorth the Younger rose slowly from his seat. The chamber fell silent, waiting to hear what the representative of the galaxy's former most aggressive species would say. My father feared your kind until the day he died, Gorth said. He told me stories about the footage he had watched, the battles he had studied, the terrible things your species had done to itself. He never stopped believing that one day humanity would turn that violence against the rest of us. Grace held her breath. But he also told me something else. Gorth's armored shell seemed to soften slightly, his posture becoming less rigid. He said that if any species could change, it would be the humans. Because you are not bound by instinct the way most of us are. You can choose what you become. And that choice, more than anything else, is what makes you dangerous and wonderful in equal measure. The Corvin stepped forward and extended one armored limb in a gesture of respect. On behalf of the Corvin hegemony, I acknowledge humanity's contributions to this council over the past 50 years. You have proven yourselves worthy of the trust that was placed in you. My father would have been proud to witness this moment. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes as she accepted the gesture. It was not much, she knew. There would still be species that feared humanity. There would still be those who believed the ban should be even stricter. But it was a start. As she walked out of the chamber, she passed by a window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were living their lives, unaware that a young woman had just spoken for all of them. Unaware that the galaxy had taken one more step toward accepting them as equals. Grace smiled and kept walking. There was still work to be done, still trust to be earned, still a future to be built. But for the first time in 50 years, she believed that humanity would see it through. After all, giving up had never been their style.